Okay, welcome. Good morning. Welcome back. If you are looking for day 2 of the Leadership Decision Lab, you are in the right place. I am Asia Bribiesca-Hedin. If you are joining live, feel free to drop me a note in the chat. And if you are watching the replay, feel free to drop me a note with any questions, and I'll be sure to get back to you. So I want to dive right into day 2. Yesterday, we had a really good conversation. Sorry, I'm looking at my screen to make sure that you all can hear me and everything is functioning as expected. But yesterday, we had a really good conversation about the quality of your decisions and how it's the little decisions we make over time that actually create what we would refer to as our reputation or our credibility. And today, I really wanted to focus on aligning your decisions with the work that actually counts. So I'll back it up for a moment. I'll introduce myself, but I wanted to let you know and frame what the focus is for the brief time we're together today. I'm Asia Bribiesca-Hedin. I'm a leadership coach and trainer, and I spend a lot of time thinking, talking, and speaking on how we make decisions, how we make decisions under pressure, and the things that the external factors and internal factors that impact our decision making in such a way that it impairs our ability to be ourselves and to really lean on our brilliance and our strategic brains and our intentionality and all of the good stuff that we have going. So with that, let's get into work that does or doesn't align with what you're doing. Now, most leaders don't struggle because they aren't working hard enough. That's rarely, if ever, a concern or factor with any of the clients I've spoken with, worked with, examined. That simply is not it. Yet that is immediately where we go when we perceive a performance problem, and we often perceive that we are having ourselves as leaders a performance problem because we're not seeing the results that we intended. Makes sense, right? But the reality is that leaders struggle because they're responding to the wrong kind of like input, the wrong signals from the environment. So I want you to think about that for just a moment. It's not about not working hard enough, it's about responding to the wrong signals. So now, every organization, when you think about it, they have two different value systems. There's the published one, what they say they care about, right? So those are the values posters in the break room and up in the conference room. Um, Perhaps they're mentioned in the strategic plan. Yes. So that's great. Every organization should have those published values. Here's the challenge. Most of those published values are aspirational, which means those values are not enacted. They don't exist in the environment as we know it. Okay, so hold on to that one for a second. That is the one side. Now, the other side, the other value system that organizations have is the one you live and breathe every day. It's but that's also the one that gets all of the attention. That's the one that gets the budget. That's the one that gets rewarded. That's the one that gets people promoted. And they're often not the same thing. In fact, I'm going to step that back and say they're rarely, if ever, the same thing in very few organizations. Are their stated values reflected in their culture? So hold on to that thought for a second, because leaders get really stuck when they're making decisions based on that first value set right? Those published values and what they have posted on break room walls versus the values upon which they're being evaluated, which are the second set. That's the enacted priorities or the enacted values, or you can think about it as the actual culture of the organization. Okay, you guys with me? So 2 value sets. And this is critical. So I'm going to have you, grab your notebooks again. I want you to write a couple things down. I want you to write down one area where you're investing a lot of time and effort. And I want you to answer honestly. Don't try to edit it, and you don't have to share it with anyone. But who actually notices that work where you're investing all of that time and effort? So write that down. What happens if it goes well? And in fact, I'll drop this in the chat. What happens if it goes well? And then what happens if it doesn't? So this is all based on where you're spending a lot of your time and attention. I dropped that in the chat, so hopefully you can see that. So who actually notices the work where you're investing all of that time and effort? What happens if it goes well, and what happens if it doesn't? Now, here's where we go with that. Is this aligned with what's actually rewarded here? Is it aligned with what my organization actually rewards? Based on, there are a couple of things I often look at in terms of what an organization rewards, and you can jot these down. One of them, of course, is where all of the budget is going. One of them is based on the conversations that senior leaders are having proactively amongst themselves and with their teams, not the ones that are scheduled in as compliance. And I'll give you an example of that. For example, organizations who say that they value inclusion or diversity, yet all of the activities relating to advancing inclusion or diversity in that organization, whether it's a veterans program, a women's program, a culturally or racially based program, are volunteer efforts and have little to no budget. And even when they have a budget, there is not actually time preserved or guaranteed to pursue that effort. Okay. Hopefully you guys are following that. So that is a value that the organization says that they hold. And I'm sure for most organizations, for many organizations anyway, it's one that they aspire to, but they don't value it or reward it enough to ensure that it is appropriately funded. That engagement from senior leadership isn't just at the, annual event, but rather recognized week to week, month to month. So again, that was a simple example. The other one is you will have some organizations, a lot of them like to say that they have a value of collaboration. But then when you look to see who is getting rewarded, who is getting the accolades, who is getting the promotions, and who has most access to decision makers and senior leaders, it might not be folks who you would tag as collaborative. In fact, it might be the opposite. It might be the most cutthroat, the most difficult people to work with, because they get a certain job done, and it's not the job the organization talks about. So consider what that looks like in your environment. This is usually when leaders want to jump straight to tactics, like, okay, I see the difference. I see I've been busting my butt or whatever you've been busting in order to continue to perform and deliver in this one area. That as it turns out, now you might be recognizing that that is not the area your organization prioritizes. And you know it's not the area your organization prioritizes, or a function, or even a set of conversations they prioritize, because you're not brought into the room to be a part of that conversation, a part of their bigger conversations. But the work we're doing today, it's not about solving it, it's about recognizing that misalignment, right? Execution comes later inside a structure designed to support it. But for now, I just want you to stay with the noticing. Okay? Now, misalignment doesn't look like failure. I want to make sure you grab onto that, because you may be successful in terms of you may be getting the appreciation certificate every year when performance reviews are happening. So it doesn't look like failure, but what it does look like is that the rewards don't match the effort, meaning you're busy but under recognized. So that appreciation certificate in no way acknowledges the actual effort and impact that you had in the organization, right? Doing solid work that doesn't travel up to decision makers. That's what misalignment looks like. Really good work that goes unseen and is invisible. The other way it often looks for people is waiting for your effort to eventually one day be noticed. Eventually one day it'll be noticed. This is not a capability issue, and this is what I want you to understand. Clearly, the capability is there, the results are there. It's a decision issue. So let's talk a little bit about redirecting effort. If you decided based on what actually counts in your environment, not what's advertised, but what actually counts, what would you protect and prioritize differently? So I want you to think about this really practically. Which relationships would you give more intentional attention to, right? Invest more time or consideration in. Which tasks or projects or initiatives would you stop over investing in? Which focus areas would you stop letting get interrupted because of all of the busyness? Which skills or capabilities would you develop because they seem to hold weight in this environment? So write those down. I have them jotted down here for you, so I will drop them in the chat. So if you decided based on what actually counts in your environment, not what's advertised, what would you protect? What would you do differently? Take a quick moment to write those down. Now, based on what you're noticing there, based on what you're writing down, well, I mentioned the intention here isn't necessarily to solve, but to surface the misalignment, become aware of it, and start to understand the impact of it. I do want us to spend a couple of minutes just talking about how to carry this work forward with you so that beginning today, as soon as we close this window and end this conversation, you have something to take action on. So go ahead and look again at where you're spending the bulk of your time. In fact, I'm going to invite you to take a couple of minutes and write down the top 5 to 7 areas where you spend the bulk of your time. Take a moment to write those down. Now, while you're writing, I'm going to type this in the chat, if I can get the chat up here where I can click it. So write down the top areas where you're investing time. and effort. I'm going to say and attention. Okay, there you go. Drop that in the chat. So write that down. Take a moment. Now, once you've written that down, I want you to find another spot, and I want you to write down maybe the top 5 to 7 priorities your organization actually has. Let's reduce it, because 5 to 7 might be too many for you to try to consider, but let's say the top 3 priorities that your organization has. Meaning where they're investing their time, their effort, their dollars, what senior leaders are talking about, the initiatives that are getting the most recognition and time and effort and attention. So write down those top 3 that you can recognize. Now look at your lists. Go through your list of 5 to 7 items where you spend most of your time, and just add a check mark, or however you want to do it, to those where it seems to align with those top 3 priorities of your organization. Take a moment to do that quick audit. Now, it's possible that as you run that quick exercise I gave you, that you will have 1 or 2 of the activities that you do that align with what the organization prioritizes based on your assessment. And it's possible you will have none. And this isn't necessarily a woe is me moment, but it is an awareness moment. And awareness always has to precede action. So that being said, now that you're aware which work does get the recognition, does get the accolades, does get the acknowledgement, the support, the resourcing from your organization, how might this impact your list of priorities? So I know we already asked that question earlier, but now we're asking it against the backdrop of you having identified perhaps those top 3 priorities for your organization. So that's it. All you want to do at this point is identify what part of your work actually does align with what the organization prioritizes, and distinguish how more of your effort and time can go there. This was a little mini action that you can take as we close out today's conversation. But again, the intention here is to have you recognize that there really are 2 value systems. There's what the organization says that they prioritize. And again, it's not because there's any malice there. It's simply because those are the enacted, those are not the enacted priorities yet, but they're the aspirational priorities. It's what they're aiming for at some point, how they see themselves, kind of like a future vision. And then there's the priorities today that are occurring right now in your environment, or what you might refer to as culture. And you need to distinguish those, because we have a tendency to overinvest in the advertised priorities and what the organization says they value, than to invest in a way that's reflective of the culture that actually exists in the organization. You know that some of the work that you do in the organization goes unseen, and you want to make decisions with that in mind. Now, alignment is not about doing more. So it's really important that we get this piece. It really is not about finding more ways to jam more work into your day. It's about deciding differently about what work you do and how the impact you have is demonstrated in your environment. Not, hidden at your desk, but how it's demonstrated in your environment. So tomorrow we're going to look at something a little bit different. Again, each of these build on each other. Yesterday we talked about how we make decisions to guard our comfort, but those decisions completely conflict against our priorities and what we say is most important to us and the outcome we're trying to achieve. And then we wonder why we're not getting there. Same thing here. In fact, I think I just posted it in these terms. When you're over investing in the work that doesn't get you where you want to go, that's like putting gas in the wrong car, right? Fueling the wrong vehicle and then wondering why you got stranded on the side of the road. It's the exact same thing. You cannot invest or fuel as much the work that's not going to get you where you want to go. It seems pretty straightforward, hopefully, when you hear it that way. So I want you to consider where that's what's happening, where you're putting gas or fuel in the wrong vehicle. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about what happens when things do not go according to plan. Because if we're honest, things rarely, if ever, go according to plan. And when things go off the rails, this is where leaders either stall and lose it, or they recover and actually often come back even stronger based on what they decide next. Okay, so thank you for being with me. If you have a quick question, I'll give you about 30 seconds to type it in the chat and I will address it. Otherwise, you can simply drop the questions in. I will see them after the event and I'll be glad to drop you a note with any responses to your questions. Okay, with that, thank you for being here for day 2 of the Leadership Decision Lab. I'm looking forward to being with you tomorrow for day 3, where we're focusing entirely on recovering after a setback or failure. All right, go out there and lead.